Picture standing in the middle of an empty plain, where the wind carries echoes of a forgotten world beneath your feet. Beneath layers of dust and time lie the remains of cities so vast, so advanced, they once rivaled the greatest metropolises of today. These were places where thousands walked, where markets buzzed with life, and where entire civilizations rose to unimaginable heights, only to vanish without a trace. What happened to these lost megacities? Why did they crumble into silence, leaving behind only fragments of their glory? Today, we're uncovering the stories of 22 ancient cities that once dominated the world, from the jungles of Cambodia to the deserts of the Middle East, each with a mystery as captivating as the last. Think about the sheer scale of these places, cities that housed hundreds of thousands, built monuments that defied their time, and thrived for centuries before disappearing into legend. Some were swallowed by nature, their towering temples consumed by vines and forests. Others fell to war, their streets scorched and abandoned overnight. And then there are those that simply vanished, their people gone, their downfall a riddle still unsolved. These aren't just ruins, they're time capsules holding clues to the ambitions, the triumphs, and the mistakes of the past. What can they teach us about our own cities today? What warnings do they whisper across the centuries? This journey isn't just about stones and rubble. It's about the people who walked these streets, the lives they lived, and the legacies they left behind. We'll explore how a city like Mohenjo-Daro, with its sophisticated plumbing and grid-like streets, could vanish so completely from history. We'll wander the ghostly remains of Great Zimbabwe, where gold once flowed and kings ruled. And we'll stand in the shadow of Petra, carved into rose-red cliffs, a place so stunning it feels like a mirage. These stories aren't just history, they're a reminder of how fragile even the mightiest civilizations can be. So let's step into the past together and uncover the secrets of these vanished megapolises, because their silence speaks louder than you might think. Mohenjo-Daro stands as one of history's greatest puzzles, a city so advanced its ruins still leave archaeologists in awe. Imagine walking down streets laid out in perfect right angles, past homes with indoor bathrooms connected to a citywide drainage system, all built over 4,000 years ago. This wasn't just a settlement, it was a masterpiece of urban planning, a place where order and cleanliness were priorities centuries before Rome or Athens rose to prominence. The people of Mohenjo-Daro traded with distant lands, crafted exquisite jewelry, and even left behind tiny treasures like the famous dancing girl statue, her confident pose frozen in bronze, telling us stories of artistry and pride. Yet by 1900 BC, the streets fell silent, the wells dried up, the workshops emptied. Unlike other ancient cities, there's no evidence of war, no burned buildings, no mass graves. Just abandonment. Some scientists point to climate change, as shifting river patterns may have turned fertile land into dust. Others suggest the lifeblood of the city, the mighty Indus River, changed its course, leaving Mohenjo-Daro stranded like a ship on dry land. Then there are the more haunting theories, a slow decline as trade routes shifted, or even whispers of an ancient disaster lost to time. The truth is, we may never know exactly what happened. What makes Mohenjo-Daro so fascinating isn't just its disappearance, but what it reveals about human ambition. This was a society that mastered water management, standardized weights and measures, and built with a precision that rivals modern engineering, all without the palaces or towering monuments we associate with ancient power. Their greatness was in their everyday genius, in the quiet dignity of a well-made brick or a carefully planned neighborhood, and that's what makes their vanishing so poignant. If a civilization this sophisticated could fade away, what does that say about our own cities? The stones of Mohenjo-Daro don't just whisper about the past, they ask us questions about the future. Now let's travel to the heart of Cambodia, where the ruins of Angkor rise from the jungle like a dream half-remembered. This wasn't just a city, it was an empire in stone, a place where towering temples like Angkor Wat stretched toward the heavens, their walls carved with thousands of celestial dancers and epic battles. At its peak, Angkor covered over 1,000 square kilometers, making it the largest pre-industrial city in the world. Canals crisscrossed the landscape, feeding rice paddies that sustained nearly 1 million people. The Khmer rulers who built this marvel saw themselves as god-kings, bridging earth and the divine. But by the 1500s, the streets were empty, the reservoirs dry, and the jungle had begun its slow conquest, wrapping roots around pillars and swallowing entire neighborhoods in green. What could topple such a powerhouse? Some point to the land itself. Decades of relentless construction and intensive farming may have stripped the soil, while elaborate water systems faltered under droughts or monsoon floods. Others argue it was politics. Rival kingdoms chipped away at Khmer dominance, trade routes shifted, and the elite may have simply walked away, leaving the city to wither. But here's the twist: Angkor never truly vanished. Locals knew these ruins as sacred spaces long before Western explorers rediscovered them in the 1800s. The jungle didn't erase Angkor, it preserved it, guarding its secrets until we were ready to listen. What's haunting about Angkor isn't just its scale, but how it mirrors our own cities. The Khmers reshaped their environment with canals and dams, just as we build skyscrapers and highways. Their struggles with water management, too much or too little, feel eerily familiar today. And perhaps that's the lesson. Civilizations don't always fall with a bang. Sometimes they fade, buckling under slow pressures we fail to notice until it's too late. Angkor's stones whisper a warning about hubris, about balance, about the price of greatness. As vines creep back over restored temples, it's hard not to wonder, what will the jungle claim next? Long before skyscrapers dotted the American Midwest, a different kind of skyline rose from the Mississippi River Valley, a city of earth and fire, where towering mounds cast shadows over bustling plazas. Cahokia wasn't just a village, it was the beating heart of a civilization, a place where 20,000 people lived, traded, and celebrated beneath the watchful gaze of Monk's Mound, a colossal earthen pyramid larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza at its base. Imagine the scene: wooden homes stretching for miles, ceremonial games in the Grand Plaza, and priests ascending the mounds to commune with the heavens. This wasn't just the largest city in North America. It was a cultural powerhouse, a crossroads where ideas, goods, and people converged from across the continent. Yet by the year 1400, the plazas were quiet. The mounds, once polished smooth by countless footsteps, grew wild with grass. What could unravel such a thriving society? Some point to nature's fickleness. Decades of drought may have withered crops, while overhunting and deforestation could have stripped the land bare. Others see clues in the city's very design. Cahokia's elites may have grown too powerful, their demand for grand projects and feasts straining the people's loyalty. Archaeologists have found eerie evidence of ritual violence, mass burials that hint at turmoil or desperation in the city's final days. Was it rebellion, famine, or simply a slow unraveling as families drifted away to greener pastures? What makes Cahokia's story so gripping isn't just its fall, but what it tells us about the ingenuity of Native American civilizations. These weren't nomadic tribes, they were urban planners, astronomers, and engineers who reshaped the landscape with nothing but woven baskets and sheer determination. Monk's Mound alone required 14 million baskets of soil, each one carried by hand. And then there's Woodhenge, a circle of towering posts aligned with the solstices, proving Cahokia's people watched the skies as closely as their Mesoamerican contemporaries. Their disappearance isn't a footnote, it's a reminder that greatness takes many forms, and that even the most vibrant cities can fade into earth and memory. As we walk the empty plazas today, we're left wondering, if Cahokia had endured, how different might our map of history look? Now, let's turn our gaze to the Mediterranean, where the island of Crete holds the ruins of a city so advanced, its name became synonymous with lost grandeur. Knossos wasn't just a palace, it was the vibrant core of the Minoan civilization, a place where frescoes of leaping dolphins adorned the walls, and multi-story buildings boasted running water and flush toilets over 3,000 years before modern plumbing. Traders from Egypt and Mesopotamia marveled at its labyrinthine halls and bustling harbors, while its artists captured the grace of nature in vivid colors. Yet around 1400 BC, the lights went out. Earthquakes, invasion, or something more mysterious, the answers lie buried in ash and legend. Great Zimbabwe rises from the African savanna like a riddle carved in stone, a city so monumental, early European explorers refused to believe Africans built it. These towering walls, some reaching 11 meters high, curve gracefully without mortar, their granite blocks fitting together like pieces of an ancient puzzle. At its peak, this was the heartbeat of a kingdom that stretched from the Limpopo River to the Indian Ocean, trading gold, ivory, and copper with merchants as far away as China and Persia. Imagine the bustling courtyards where artisans shaped delicate gold jewelry, or the hilltop palace where kings surveyed a realm of wealth and power. Yet by the 1500s, the echoes of hammers and voices faded, leaving only the wind to whisper through empty passageways. What could bring down such a powerhouse? The land itself holds clues. Tree rings and soil samples reveal punishing droughts may have parched the region, withering crops and scattering livestock. Others point to the city's success, perhaps overpopulation drained resources, or the very trade routes that enriched Great Zimbabwe shifted, leaving it stranded like a ship without a sail. Then there's the lingering question of politics. Did rival factions fracture the kingdom from within? The ruins offer no clear answers, only silent testimony to a civilization that mastered stone and commerce, then vanished into legend. What makes these ruins so extraordinary isn't just their scale, but what they represent. For centuries, colonial scholars insisted such sophistication couldn't be African. They spun tales of Phoenician or Arab builders, refusing to credit the Shona people. But archaeology doesn't lie. The soapstone birds found here, now Zimbabwe's national emblem, carry a message. This was an indigenous achievement, a testament to innovation that flourished long before outsiders arrived. Great Zimbabwe's true legacy isn't just its abandonment, but the pride it reclaims, proof that Africa's history is written not just in oral traditions, but in stone. As we walk these empty corridors today, we're not just solving a mystery, we're honoring a narrative too long ignored. Hidden behind narrow canyon walls, where sunlight turns stone the color of crushed roses, Petra emerges like a mirage, a city chiseled from the living rock. This wasn't just a desert outpost, it was a masterclass in survival where the Nabateans turned scarcity into strength. Picture caravans of camels laden with spices and silk winding through the sick, a towering fissure in the earth, only to emerge before the treasury's ornate facade, its columns glowing at dawn. Petra's genius lay in its veins, a network of channels and cisterns that harvested every drop of rain, turning arid cliffs into an oasis supporting 30,000 people. The Nabateans didn't just adapt to the desert, They conquered it, carving theaters, temples, and tombs with a precision that still stuns engineers today. Yet by the 7th century, the caravans stopped coming, the aqueducts ran dry, the city's heartbeat slowed to a whisper. Why? The answer may lie in the very trade that built it. As Rome's empire crumbled, new sea routes bypassed Petra's overland trails, leaving its markets empty. Earthquakes shattered aqueducts, and without water, the desert reclaimed its ground. But there's a twist: Petra never fully died. Nomads and pilgrims lingered, and later, crusaders even fortified its ruins. Its true discovery by the West in 1812 wasn't a resurrection. It was a reintroduction to a world that had forgotten its name. What lingers most about Petra isn't just its fall, but its defiance. In a land that seems designed to erase human traces, these cliffs remember. The treasury's bullet-pocked facade, where Bedouin tribes once shot rifles, hoping to release mythical treasure, speaks to the legends that outlived the city itself. And perhaps that's the lesson. Civilizations don't vanish when their people leave. They vanish when their stories stop being told. Petra's silence isn't emptiness. It's an invitation to listen closer, to hear the echoes of merchants haggling over incense, of chisels shaping rock, of a city that refused to be swallowed by the sand. Now let's journey to the jungles of Central America, where another metropolis slipped into the green embrace of nature. Tikal's pyramids pierce the canopy like stone spears, monuments to a Maya civilization at its zenith. But unlike Petra's slow fade, Tikal's collapse came swiftly, a cautionary tale of how even the mightiest can crumble under pressure. Tikal's pyramids rise from the jungle like stone sentinels, their steps worn smooth by centuries of rain and time. This wasn't just a city, it was the beating heart of the Maya world, a place where kings dressed as gods climbed temple steps to commune with the stars, where astronomers tracked Venus with uncanny precision, and where the shouts of ball players echoed across grand plazas. At its peak around 800 CE, Tikal sprawled across 16 square kilometers, its population swelling to 100,000. Imagine the noise of a marketplace trading jade from the Motagua Valley, obsidian from the highlands, and quetzal feathers from distant clouds forests. Now imagine the silence that followed. By 900 CE, the temple stood empty, the royal palaces abandoned to the creeping vines. What could unravel such a sophisticated civilization? The answer may lie in the very stones of Tikal. Tree rings from nearby lakes tell a story of relentless drought, decades without rain, crops withering in the fields, reservoirs evaporating under the scorching sun. But climate alone doesn't explain the intricate carvings left unfinished, or the evidence of hurried repairs to city walls. Archaeology paints a darker picture. Rival city-states like Calakmul waged war, draining Tikal's resources, while the elite may have clung to power too tightly, demanding ever grander monuments even as famine spread. Then there's the haunting discovery in Temple 1, a royal tomb sealed with a grim offering of sacrificed children, perhaps a desperate plea to gods who no longer answered. Yet Tikal's true mystery isn't just why it fell, but how it thrived for so long in such a hostile environment. The Maya transformed swamps into fertile fields using raised beds and canals, and their rainwater collection systems were engineering marvels. Their collapse wasn't a failure of ingenuity, it was a collision of forces: nature's cruelty, human ambition, and the fragile web of trade and loyalty that binds any civilization. As we climb Temple 4 today, gazing over the endless green canopy, it's impossible not to wonder, did the last ruler of Tikal stand here too, watching the smoke of distant wildfires, knowing the end had come? The jungle took back the city, but it couldn't erase the legacy of a people who reached for the stars and nearly grasped them. Now, let's cross the Atlantic to a city that met a very different fate. Pompeii's story is frozen in ash, a snapshot of Roman life interrupted in an instant. But unlike Tikal's slow unraveling, this was a catastrophe written in fire and stone, a reminder that sometimes nature doesn't just nudge civilizations toward the edge, it hurls them into the abyss. High on the windswept plains of central Turkey, the ruins of Hattusa tell a story of power suddenly undone. This wasn't just a city, it was the nerve center of the Hittite Empire, a civilization that rivaled ancient Egypt and Babylon. Picture colossal stone walls snaking across the hills, wide enough for chariots to patrol atop them, and towering gateways flanked by lions and sphinxes, their eyes watching for approaching enemies. Inside those walls, scribes pressed thousands of cuneiform tablets into wet clay, recording everything from royal decrees to recipes for bread. The Hittites were masters of diplomacy and war, their treaties etched in silver, their iron weapons the envy of the Bronze Age world. Yet around 1200 BC, flames engulfed the palaces, the gates were left unguarded, and within generations, an empire that had stood for centuries became little more than a whisper in the wind. What could bring down such a formidable capital? The blackened layers of Hattusa's ruins suggest fire, but was it the torch of invaders or the desperate act of its own people? Some historians point to the mysterious sea peoples, marauders who ravaged coastal cities across the Mediterranean around this time. Could they have swept inland, overwhelming even the Hittites' legendary defenses? Others see clues in the empire's fragile web of vassal states. Perhaps a cascade of rebellions fractured its unity, leaving Hattusa isolated. Then there's the chilling possibility of internal collapse. Drought records from nearby lakes reveal years of failed harvests, while tablets hint at court intrigues that may have weakened the kingdom from within. The truth may lie in all these threads tangled together, a perfect storm of hunger, betrayal, and violence. But Hattusa's greatest mystery isn't just its fall, it's how completely the Hittites vanished from memory. Unlike Egypt or Assyria, their name was erased for centuries, their language undeciphered until modern archaeologists pieced together those clay tablets. Imagine a civilization so vast, so advanced, that it could disappear from history's stage as if it had never existed. Those silent gates and shattered temples force us to ask, how many other empires have risen and fallen without leaving even a trace? The Hittites' legacy isn't just in their ruins, it's in the warning they whisper across 3,000 years. Even the mightiest walls can crumble. Even the most carefully kept records can turn to dust. Now let's turn to a city that met a different fate, one not of fire, but of slow suffocation under the sands of time. Far to the south, where the Nile's waters once nurtured a thriving metropolis, the lost city of Tanis waits to tell its story. Unlike Hattusa's dramatic end, Tanis slipped away almost unnoticed, its treasures buried so completely that explorers would later mistake it for another legendary city altogether. Palmyra rises from the Syrian desert like a mirage made real, a city where camel caravans once unloaded silks from China and spices from India beneath towering Corinthian columns. This wasn't just a stop along the Silk Road. It was a cultural crossroads where Roman engineers met Persian artisans, where temples to Bel stood alongside statues of Roman emperors. Picture the scene, merchants haggling in a dozen languages, the scent of incense drifting from the temple of Bolshemin, and the laughter of wealthy patrons echoing through the Grand Theatre. At its peak in the 2nd century CE, Palmyra wasn't merely surviving in the desert. It was thriving, turning golden sands into golden opportunities with ingenious water systems and shrewd diplomacy. Yet by the 300s, the caravans grew sparse, the theaters fell silent. What could dim such a brilliant oasis? Some point to the ambitions of Queen Zenobia, whose revolt against Rome in 270 drew imperial wrath, leaving Palmyra's walls breached and its treasures plundered. Others trace its decline to the slow death of overland trade as ships began bypassing desert routes, carrying goods faster and cheaper across the Indian Ocean. But perhaps the cruelest twist came recently, when modern conflict brought bulldozers and explosives to these ancient stones, erasing irreplaceable monuments like the Arch of Triumph in a matter of seconds. What lingers most about Palmyra isn't just its ruins, but its spirit of reinvention. The city's very architecture whispers of cultural fusion, Roman arches adorned with Persian motifs, local deities worshipped alongside imported gods. Even its language blended Aramaic with Greek, creating inscriptions that still puzzle linguists today. This was a place that mastered the art of adaptation, bending without breaking under the pressures of empires. And that's what makes its fate so haunting. Palmyra didn't just fall to time or economics, it became a casualty of our own era's conflicts, a reminder that the sands of history never stop shifting. As sunlight filters through the remaining columns today, casting long shadows across the rubble, we're left to wonder, how many more crossroads will we lose before we learn to protect them? Now let's journey to the Andean highlands, where another city's story takes a very different turn. High above the clouds, the stones of Machu Picchu cling to mountain ridges like a secret too precious to share, a place that vanished so completely, even the conquistadors never found it. Unlike Palmyra's slow unraveling, this was a disappearance so total, it feels intentional, as if the very earth conspired to keep its mysteries safe. Teotihuacan sprawls across the valley like a celestial blueprint, a city so grand, its very name means the place where gods were born. Imagine walking down the Avenue of the Dead, flanked by the Pyramid of the Moon and the towering Pyramid of the Sun, its steps ascending toward the sky as if trying to touch the heavens. At its peak around 450 CE, this was more than just a metropolis. It was the beating heart of Mesoamerica, home to 200,000 people from every corner of the ancient world. The air would have hummed with a dozen languages, the plazas bustling with traders offering obsidian from distant mountains, jade from the southern jungles, and feathers from quetzal birds that shimmered like living emeralds. Yet by 750 CE, the fires in its temples had gone cold. The murals depicting watery paradise scenes peeled and faded. The gods, it seemed, had left their city behind. What could silence such a powerhouse? The ruins offer conflicting clues. In the Street of the Dead, archaeologists found evidence of ritual fires, not celebratory but furious. Statues were decapitated, their stone heads buried in pits. Was this a revolt against the ruling elite, a bloody uprising fueled by inequality, or did the land itself turn against Teotihuacan? Layers of sediment reveal a grim story. Decades of drought parched the valley, while relentless construction may have stripped the forests bare, triggering erosion that choked the life from farmland. The city's genius, its intricate drainage systems and vast agricultural terraces, may have become its undoing as over-engineered landscapes collapsed under their own weight. But here's the real mystery. We don't even know who built Teotihuacan. Unlike the Maya or Aztecs, its founders left no royal tombs, no boastful inscriptions naming kings or conquerors. This was a city obsessed with collective grandeur, where anonymity was woven into the architecture. The murals depict priests and warriors, but never rulers. The sprawling apartment compounds suggest a society where merchants and artisans lived as well as elites, a radical vision of urban life for its time. Perhaps that's why its fall feels so haunting. Without the cult of personality that sustained other empires, Teotihuacan's identity was fragile. When the people left, they took its meaning with them, leaving behind only echoes in the stones. Today, as swallows dart between the ruins, it's hard not to feel the weight of that absence. The Pyramid of the Sun still casts its shadow, but the voices that once filled this valley are gone. Teotihuacan's legacy isn't just in what it built, but in what it asked of us. How does a city endure when its gods fall silent? How do you remember a people who forgot to write their own names? The silence here isn't empty, it's a question waiting for an answer. Now, let's cross the Atlantic to a city that met its end not with a whisper, but a cataclysm. In the shadow of Mount Vesuvius, Pompeii's fate was sealed in fire and ash, a stark contrast to Teotihuacan's slow unraveling, and a reminder that sometimes history doesn't fade. It freezes. Pompeii wasn't just buried, it was suspended in time. When Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 CE, it didn't merely destroy this thriving Roman city. It sealed it beneath layers of scorching ash like a photograph in volcanic stone. Walk those cobbled streets today, and you'll find bakeries with loaves still in their ovens, tavern counters stained with wine, and vivid frescoes of mythological scenes glowing as brightly as the day they were painted. Even the graffiti feels alive, scratched jokes, political slogans, and love notes that echo with voices silenced mid-sentence. But most haunting of all are the plaster casts of victims, their final moments frozen in agony. A man shielding his face, a child curled beside a parent, a dog forever tethered to its post. This wasn't just a disaster, it was a moment stolen from history, preserved with cruel precision. Could Pompeii have been saved? The earth had given warnings. Tremors rattled the city for days before the eruption, even damaging buildings. But quakes were common in this region, and without the concept of volcanoes, the word itself wouldn't exist for another 1,000 years. No one recognized Vesuvius's smoking peak as a threat. The wealthiest citizens might have fled after the initial tremors, but thousands stayed, unaware that the mountain looming over their vineyards was a ticking clock. When the pyroclastic surge hit, it moved at 100 miles per hour, a superheated avalanche of gas and rock that vaporized flesh and turned brain matter to glass in seconds. There was no outrunning it. What makes Pompeii unforgettable isn't just its tragedy, but what it reveals about everyday Roman life. Unlike grand monuments or imperial palaces, this was a working-class city, full of fish sauce factories, crowded apartment blocks, and public baths where gossip flowed as freely as the water. The brothel's explicit frescoes, the election notices painted on walls, the takeout counters still holding stale 2,000-year-old food, all of it paints a picture startlingly familiar. These weren't statues or legends, they were people who complained about rent, adored their pets, and scribbled jokes in public toilets. Their modernity is what chills us. A bakery owner named Terentius Neo and his wife stare from a fresco, her stylus poised over a wax tablet, his scroll in hand, a portrait of literacy and ambition that could hang in any cafe today. Yet Pompeii's greatest lesson might be its fragility. The same volcanic soil that made the region lush with vineyards also nurtured its doom. Prosperity and peril lived side by side, invisible until it was too late. As we walk those streets now, peering into kitchens and gardens, the line between past and present blurs. The residents of Pompeii didn't think their world could end either. And that's the whisper that lingers in the ash. Civilization isn't a guarantee. It's a flickering candle vulnerable to the wind. Now, let's turn to a city that faced annihilation not from nature's fury, but from human hands. Far to the east, where the Tigris and Euphrates meet, the once mighty Babylon fell not in a day, but through a slow unraveling of conquest and neglect, a reminder that even legends can crumble when the world moves on. Carthage rose from the shores of North Africa like a phoenix in more than name, a city of merchants and mariners whose ships dominated the Mediterranean long before Rome stamped its eagles across the ancient world. Picture the bustling docks where cedar wood from Lebanon and tin from Britain changed hands, where sailors swapped tales of Atlantic tides beyond the Pillars of Hercules. The Carthaginians didn't just trade, they engineered harbors within harbors, circular naval bases hidden behind mercantile quays, their warships shielded like secrets. And at the city's heart stood the Tophet, an open-air sanctuary where incense smoke curled skyward, a place that later Roman propaganda would twist into lurid tales of child sacrifice, though archaeologists still debate what truly unfolded there. This was a civilization that minted coins with the face of the goddess Tanit, whose merchant princes lived in villas cooled by ingenious water systems, and whose general Hannibal would later march elephants over the Alps to humble Rome itself. Yet in 146 BC, the legions came not to negotiate but to erase. For 17 days, Carthage burned, its libraries and temples reduced to cinders. Survivors were sold into slavery, the very earth salted to poison future crops, a final act of vengeance from Rome, who could never forget the scars Hannibal left on Italy. But here's the twist: Carthage's destruction was so thorough, its memory so vilified, that for centuries historians assumed little survived. Then, in the 1950s, workers digging a sewer trench struck mosaic tiles leading to the rediscovery of the Antonine Baths, a sprawling complex of marble and mosaics built by the Romans centuries later, ironically atop the ruins of the city they'd tried to obliterate. What makes Carthage's fall so chilling isn't just the violence of its end, but the fragility of its legacy. Unlike Athens or Alexandria, no Carthaginian plays or philosophies survived Rome's purge. We know them mostly through their enemies' accounts, Roman historians who painted them as greedy, cruel, and decadent. Only recently have archaeologists begun piecing together a different story from shipwrecks and salvage, of astronomers who mapped the stars, of farmers who wrote manuals on agronomy, of a constitution so balanced Aristotle praised it. The tragedy of Carthage isn't merely that it fell, but that its voice was silenced twice, first by swords, then by ink. Now, let's turn to a city that met a quieter fate, not in flames but in fading whispers. Far to the east, where the Indus River once nurtured one of history's most enigmatic civilizations, the ruins of Dolavera wait beneath the Indian sun, a place whose people mastered water in a desert, then vanished without leaving a single weapon behind. Babylon wasn't just a city, it was an idea, a shimmering mirage of power and opulence rising from the dusty plains of Mesopotamia. Imagine standing on the processional way, where lions of glazed brick prowled across walls in eternal silence, leading to the towering Ishtar Gate, its cobalt blue tiles studded with golden dragons. This was the heart of Hammurabi's empire, where the first written laws etched justice into stone, and where the legendary hanging gardens supposedly cascaded from terraces like a waterfall of greenery, a gift from King Nebuchadnezzar to his homesick queen. For centuries, Babylon was the axis of the world, a place where astronomers tracked the stars, mathematicians pioneered algebra, and merchants traded lapis lazuli from Afghanistan and cedar from Lebanon. Yet by the 2nd century CE, the gardens had crumbled to dust, the ziggurats sagged into mounds, and the Euphrates River, once the city's lifeblood, had shifted its course, leaving Babylon stranded like a forgotten ship. What could unravel such magnificence? The answers lie in layers of conquest and neglect. Alexander the Great dreamed of making Babylon his eastern capital, but his sudden death in 323 BC left those plans to rot alongside his body in the palace throne room. Later rulers favored new cities like Seleucia, leaving Babylon to wither. Then came the Parthians, who stripped its bricks to build elsewhere, reducing grand temples to quarries. But perhaps Babylon's greatest enemy was time itself. The very mud bricks that made its construction possible, mixed with straw and baked under the sun, were no match for centuries of rain and wind. Unlike Egypt's stone monuments, Mesopotamia's architecture was fragile, its glory ephemeral. Even the hanging gardens, if they existed at all, left no physical trace, their existence debated by scholars who wonder if they were merely a poetic exaggeration, a legend too beautiful to fade. Yet Babylon's true legacy isn't just in its ruins, but in its echoes. The Code of Hammurabi influenced legal systems for millennia. Its astronomers mapped the zodiac, a system we still reference today. And its name became synonymous with decadence and downfall, a cautionary tale whispered across cultures, from the Bible's Tower of Babel to modern art and music. Walking through the ruins today, where reconstructions of the Ishtar Gate hint at vanished splendor, it's hard not to feel the weight of that paradox, a city so influential yet so thoroughly erased. The Euphrates may have abandoned Babylon, but history never did. Its story lingers in every lawbook, every star chart, every garden we build to chase beauty in an impermanent world. Now let's turn to a city that faced a different kind of vanishing, not through slow decay, but through a single catastrophic night. Far to the west, where the Aegean Sea meets the Greek mainland, the once great Mycenae stands as a stark reminder that even the mightiest fortresses can fall in darkness. Troy isn't just a city, it's a story etched into the bedrock of human imagination. Standing atop the windswept hill of Hisarlik in modern Turkey, you can almost hear the clash of bronze swords and the creak of wooden wheels, the echoes of a war that may or may not have happened. For centuries, scholars dismissed Homer's Iliad as pure myth, until a determined German businessman named Heinrich Schliemann began digging in the 1870s. What he uncovered stunned the world. Not just one Troy, but 9 cities stacked like layers of a forgotten cake, each built atop the ruins of the last. The 6th layer, with its massive walls and fire-scarred stones, seemed to match Homer's descriptions. Could this be the Troy of Priam and Hector, of Achilles and the fabled wooden horse? But the truth is far murkier than legend suggests. Troy's strategic location at the crossroads of the Aegean and Anatolia made it a prize worth fighting over for millennia. Its golden age came around 1200 BCE, when it controlled vital trade routes for copper and textiles. The city's walls, 15 feet thick in places, speak of wealth and constant threat. Archaeologists have found arrowheads embedded in those stones, along with sling bullets and evidence of quakes that may have toppled towers, hints that Troy's history was written in both war and disaster. Yet the most tantalizing clue lies in a single bronze seal bearing Hittite script, which references a kingdom called Wilusa, a name startlingly close to Homer's Ilios. Could this be proof that Troy was real, or just another piece of a puzzle we're still assembling? The city's decline is as enigmatic as its rise. By the time Rome's emperors made pilgrimages to what they believed was Homer's Troy, the once great citadel was already a tourist attraction, its ruins picked over for souvenirs. Earthquakes and shifting trade routes sapped its importance, and by the Byzantine era, it was little more than a quarry for builders. But Troy's greatest legacy isn't in its stones, it's in the stories that refuse to die. From Virgil's Aeneid to Hollywood blockbusters, the tale of a city undone by pride and deception resonates because it's about more than war. It's about the fragility of power, the weight of choices, and how easily history becomes legend. As the afternoon light washes over Hisarlik's crumbled walls, one question lingers. Did the Trojan War happen as Homer sang it, or did we will it into truth because some stories are too powerful to surrender? Now let's journey to a city that vanished not in flames, but in plain sight, where the sands of Egypt guard secrets older than Troy's legends, where the Nile's shifting whispers erased a metropolis so completely, even its name was nearly lost. High in the Andean clouds, where condors circle jagged peaks, Machu Picchu clings to the mountainside like a secret too precious to share. This wasn't just a city, it was a masterpiece of stone and sky, a place where Inca engineers carved terraces so precise they still defy erosion 5 centuries later. Imagine walking its labyrinth of temples and plazas, the air thin and crisp, the Urubamba River roaring 2,000 feet below. At dawn, sunlight slips through the Intihuatana stone, a ritual pillar perfectly aligned with the solstices, proving the Incas didn't just build here, they whispered to the cosmos. Yet by the 1500s, the priests and astronomers were gone, the gateways empty, the staircases leading nowhere. Machu Picchu didn't fall to invaders or quakes, it was simply left behind, its very existence fading into local legend until an American explorer rediscovered it in 1911. Why abandon such a marvel? The absence of Spanish loot or battle damage suggests the Incas departed before conquistadors arrived, perhaps as epidemics ravaged the empire or during the civil war that left it vulnerable. Some archaeologists believe this was a royal estate for Emperor Pachacuti, a summer retreat where elites escaped Cusco's crowds. Others see clues in the sacred geometry. The Temple of the Sun's windows frame the June solstice sunrise, while the Room of the Three Windows aligns with the Inca creation myth. Was Machu Picchu a pilgrimage site, a celestial observatory, or a fortress guarding the empire's spiritual heart? The stones refuse to say, but the real mystery isn't just why Machu Picchu was abandoned, it's how it stayed hidden so long. Unlike other Inca sites plundered by the Spanish, these ruins survived untouched, shielded by sheer cliffs and swirling mists. The conquistadors never found it. Even local farmers kept its location secret, preserving it as a sacred space. Today, as tourists trek the Inca Trail, they're walking a path the empire itself forgot, a reminder that sometimes the greatest treasures aren't lost to violence or time, but to silence. Machu Picchu's power lies in its unanswered questions, in the way its stones balance between earth and sky, asking us to wonder, what other secrets do these mountains hold? Now, let's descend from the Andes to a city swallowed not by jungle, but by shifting sands. Where Machu Picchu's abandonment feels deliberate, the next ruins whisper of a slower, stranger vanishing, one grain of sand at a time. Nineveh's walls once stretched so wide, it was said a fox could run for a full day without escaping their shadow. This wasn't just a city, it was the crown jewel of the Assyrian Empire, a metropolis of staggering scale and brutality. Picture towering ziggurats looming over bustling markets where spices from India and silver from Anatolia changed hands, while chariots rumbled down streets wide enough for 5 horses abreast. At its peak in the 7th century BC, Nineveh housed over 100,000 people behind its 15-mile circuit of walls, their foundations studded with stone carvings of winged bulls to ward off enemies. The royal library alone held 30,000 cuneiform tablets, preserving everything from medical treatises to the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest surviving work of literature. Yet in 612 BC, the unthinkable happened. An alliance of Babylonians and Medes breached those legendary defenses, reducing the city to smoldering rubble in a matter of months. How could such a superpower collapse so suddenly? The answer lies in the very stones of Nineveh. Recent excavations reveal a city straining under its own ambition. King Sennacherib's grand projects like the 18-mile-long aqueduct bringing fresh water from the mountains required constant slave labor and punitive taxation. The empire had overextended, its armies stretched thin from Egypt to Persia, while conquered peoples like the Babylonians simmered with resentment. Then there's the climate clue. tree rings show catastrophic droughts in the years before Nineveh's fall, withering crops and sparking famines that eroded loyalty to the throne. But the final blow came from within. When the king executed his own son for conspiracy, the court fractured, leaving the gates vulnerable. The invaders didn't just sack Nineveh, they erased it so thoroughly that when Xenophon's Greek mercenaries passed by 2 centuries later, they mistook its ruins for natural hills. Yet Nineveh's ghost still whispers. Among the ashes, archaeologists found the library's fire-hardened tablets ironically preserved by the same flames meant to destroy them. These fragments reveal a civilization far more nuanced than its warlike reputation. Astronomers tracking lunar eclipses, gardeners cataloging medicinal herbs, even a queen's plea for diplomatic peace. The Assyrians didn't just conquer, they curated knowledge, built infrastructure, and standardized weights and measures across the known world. Their sudden obliteration wasn't just a military defeat, it was a warning about the fragility of centralized power. As we piece together their story from broken clay and shattered reliefs, one truth emerges: no wall is high enough to outlast the tides of rebellion, climate, and time. Now let's turn to a city that met a different fate, not in fire and blood, but in slow suffocation under desert winds. Far to the south, where the Nile's waters once fed a thriving oasis, the lost city of Merida waits with pyramids that rival Egypt's, yet its name barely echoes in history books. Unlike Nineveh's dramatic collapse, this was a vanishing so gradual, even its people might not have noticed they were becoming ghosts. Leptis Magna sprawled along the North African coast like a mirage of Rome in the desert, a city where emperors walked and merchants unloaded treasures from across the Mediterranean. Picture the scene: marble columns gleaming under the Libyan sun, the grand theater echoing with performances for 20,000 spectators, and the marketplace buzzing with traders haggling over ivory and exotic spices. This was no provincial outpost, it was the birthplace of Emperor Septimius Severus, who poured wealth into his hometown, transforming it into a showcase of imperial power. The harbor alone was an engineering marvel, its artificial island and breakwaters defying the sea's fury, while the streets boasted intricate mosaics and towering arches celebrating Rome's victories. For centuries, Leptis Magna thrived as a bridge between continents, its prosperity etched in every stone. Yet by the 7th century, the theaters stood silent, the harbor choked with sand, and the grand basilica's roof had collapsed. What could topple such a jewel? The answer lies in a perfect storm of misfortune. First came the Vandals in the 5th century, sweeping across North Africa and sacking the city's treasures. Though the Byzantines later reclaimed it, their rule was a shadow of Rome's glory, leaving Leptis Magna to decay under mismanagement. Then nature delivered the final blow. Shifting sands from the Sahara crept into the streets, burying colonnades and forums under dunes. The very trade winds that once filled its sails now carried the desert's relentless advance. Unlike Pompeii's sudden burial or Carthage's fiery end, Leptis Magna's demise was slow, almost indifferent, a city forgotten by empires too preoccupied to notice its fading heartbeat. But here's the twist: Leptis Magna's abandonment became its salvation. The same sands that smothered its streets also preserved them, shielding mosaics and statues from looters and time. When archaeologists began excavating in the 1920s, they uncovered a city frozen in amber, a market stall still holding ancient fruit pits, a brothel's scandalous graffiti, even the ruts of chariot wheels worn into stone streets. These weren't just ruins, they were snapshots of daily life in a multicultural hub where Roman senators rubbed shoulders with Berber nomads and Syrian merchants. The city's true tragedy isn't that it fell, but that its story was buried for 1,000 years. As we walk those resurrected colonnades today, listening to the wind whistle through the arches, it's impossible not to wonder how many other crossroads of civilization lie hidden beneath the dunes, waiting to whisper their secrets. Vijayanagara rises from the rocky plains of southern India like a dream half-remembered, a city where elephants draped in gold once paraded past temples carved with celestial dancers, where market squares buzzed with traders haggling over Persian horses and Malabar spices. Founded in 1336, this wasn't just a capital. It was the beating heart of an empire that stretched from sea to sea, a place where poets sang in marble pavilions and engineers designed aqueducts so precise they could channel monsoon rains into crystal-clear baths. The Vitala temple alone is a symphony in stone. Its iconic musical pillars produce precise notes when tapped, while the stone chariot in its courtyard seems poised to roll away, frozen mid-journey for 5 centuries. This was a city that celebrated life, where festivals lit up the night with oil lamps, and the royal stables housed 10,000 war horses ready to defend its splendor. Yet by 1565, the streets ran red, the markets burned, the temples stood silent. What could topple such a powerhouse? The answer lies in the thunder of hooves at the Battle of Talikota, where a coalition of sultanates shattered Vijayanagara's armies. But the truth runs deeper than a single defeat. For years, the empire had strained under its own weight. Nobles squabbled over succession, while the vast military drained resources needed to maintain the city's intricate water systems. When the invaders breached the gates, they didn't just loot, they methodically smashed irrigation tanks and severed aqueducts, ensuring the city would wither even if its spirit survived. Within months, the granaries emptied, the gardens turned to dust, and Vijayanagara, the city of victory, became a ghost. What lingers most isn't just the scale of the ruins, but their haunting beauty. The Queen's Bath still reflects the sky in its lotus-shaped pool, while the step tank's geometric perfection whispers of mathematical genius. Unlike other fallen cities, Vijayanagara's legacy never truly faded. Farmers nearby kept its stories alive, weaving tales of the empire into folklore long before archaeologists arrived. The stones here don't just mourn what was lost, they celebrate what endured, a culture of art, innovation, and resilience that still pulses through southern India today. As sunlight filters through the temple's pierced screens, casting constellations of light on the floor, it's impossible not to wonder, how many more melodies could those musical pillars have sung if history had played a different tune? Now let's cross continents to a city that met its end not in battle, but in a slow surrender to the elements. Where Vijayanagara's fall was dramatic, the next ruins tell a quieter tale of a metropolis strangled by the very river that once gave it life. Chan Chan sprawls across Peru's coastal desert like a mirage made of earth, a city where 10,000 artisans once shaped clay into towering walls, their surfaces etched with fish, waves, and mythical creatures that shimmered in the sun. This wasn't just a settlement, it was the beating heart of the Chimu Empire, a labyrinth of adobe palaces and reservoirs sprawling over 14 square miles. Picture walking through its citadels, where rulers plotted conquests in rooms lined with mother-of-pearl, while engineers channeled scarce rainwater through a network of canals so precise they turned barren land into fertile gardens. At its peak in the 1400s, Chan Chan housed 60,000 people, its workshops producing goldwork so exquisite, even the Inca would later covet it. Yet by the time Spanish chroniclers wrote of its ruins, the city was already a ghost, its conquering glory erased by the very empire that had once admired it. The Chimu's downfall reads like a cautionary tale about the price of prosperity. Their mastery of the desert, building in adobe to stay cool, trapping fog in nets to water crops, was also their vulnerability. When the Inca Emperor Tupac Yupanqui marched south in the 1470s, he didn't just attack Chan Chan's walls, he targeted its lifelines. The Inca diverted the Moch River, strangling the city's water supply. Within months, the reservoirs dried up, the gardens withered. The Chimu king, trapped in his own palace, surrendered rather than watch his people thirst. But here's the twist: the Inca didn't destroy Chan Chan. They stripped its gold and left its bones intact, as if even conquerors couldn't bring themselves to erase such ingenuity. What makes these ruins so haunting isn't just their scale, but their fragility. Adobe, sun-baked mud mixed with straw, crumbles under rain like sugar in tea. El Niño's torrents, which strike this coast every few decades, have melted entire districts back into the earth. Yet even in decay, Chan Chan whispers secrets. The friezes of sea otters and pelicans hint at a people who worship the ocean's bounty, while the zigzagging walls, designed to withstand earthquakes, reveal a genius for adaptation. The real tragedy: we've lost more of Chan Chan to modern looters and careless development than to centuries of storms. Each stolen artifact is a page ripped from a story we're still trying to read. As the midday sun bakes the ruins today, casting long shadows across fish-shaped reliefs, it's hard not to marvel at the irony. The Chimu built a metropolis to outlast the ages, yet chose the one material time would devour. Their legacy isn't in the walls that remain, but in the lesson they leave. Civilizations can conquer deserts, outwit droughts, and craft beauty from dust. But without water, even the mightiest cities are just sand waiting for the wind. Now, let's turn to a city that faced a different kind of thirst, not for water, but for power. Far to the north, where the jungles of Guatemala hide pyramids beneath their green cloak, the ruins of El Mirador wait with a story of ambition that dwarfed even Chan Chan's. Unlike the Chimu's engineered oasis, this was a place where kings reshaped mountains to touch the gods and paid the price for their hubris. Ani perched on the edge of a windswept plateau like a jewel balanced on a knife's edge, a city where the spires of 1,000 churches once pierced the sky, their shadows stretching across borders both real and imagined. This wasn't just a medieval metropolis, it was a tapestry woven from Armenian, Georgian, Byzantine, and Seljuk threads, its streets humming with the languages of merchants, monks, and warriors. Walk among its ruins today, and you'll see the ghostly outlines of Zoroastrian fire temples beside Christian cathedrals, their stones carved with crosses and floral motifs so intricate they seem to breathe. At its zenith in the 10th century, Ani rivaled Constantinople in splendor, earning its nickname City of 1,001 Churches, not from exaggeration but from sheer abundance. Each neighborhood seemed to have its own chapel, its own story. The Cathedral of Ani, with its soaring dome and pioneering pointed arches, inspired architects across continents, while the Church of St. Gregory boasted frescoes that glowed like stained glass even in candlelight. Yet by the 1400s, the hymns had faded, the bazaars stood empty. What could silence such a chorus of cultures? The answers lie in the very ground beneath Ani's ruins. Earthquakes rattled the region like clockwork. One in 1314 split the cathedral's dome like an eggshell, but it was human hands that dealt the final blows. Positioned on the fault line between empires, Ani became a pawn in endless wars. Byzantines clashed with Seljuks, Mongols swept through like a storm, and rival Armenian kingdoms squabbled over its carcass. Each conquest stripped another layer of vitality, until the trade routes that fed the city withered away. The final indignity came when a medieval arms race rendered its famed double walls. Obsolete cannons could now reduce centuries of craftsmanship to rubble in hours. But Ani's true tragedy isn't just its fall, but how close we came to losing its memory entirely. In the 1920s, archaeologists uncovered a library's worth of manuscripts buried beneath a collapsed chapel, their inks still vivid after centuries. One parchment held a merchant's ledger detailing shipments of saffron and silks, another, a hymn book with musical notation so precise, modern choirs could still sing it. These fragments reveal a city that didn't just endure diversity, it thrived on it, blending Persian poetry with Armenian liturgy, Georgian masonry with Syrian glasswork. Today, as the wind whistles through the ruins of the Church of the Holy Redeemer, its octagonal walls still defiantly intact, Annie asks us a question: can beauty outlast the empires that create it? The stones here hold their answer not in grandeur, but in resilience, in the way a single carved grapevine still curls around a shattered arch, refusing to let go. Now let's turn to a city that faced oblivion not through war or quakes, but through something far quieter, the slow unraveling of time itself. Where Annie's echoes still linger in stone, our next destination slipped into silence so completely, its very name was almost lost to the ages. Mesa Verde's cliff dwellings cling to sandstone alcoves like swallows' nests, their honey-colored walls blending seamlessly into the rock. This wasn't just a village, it was a vertical city, where ancestral pueblones carved entire communities into the cliffs, hauling timber and mortar up dizzying hand and toe trails to build multi-story apartments with sweeping views of the Colorado Plateau. Imagine waking to sunlight spilling through T-shaped doorways, the scent of cornmeal drifting from communal hearths, children's laughter echoing off the canyon walls. At its peak around 1200 CE, Mesa Verde thrived, with over 600 cliff dwellings and thousands of residents tending terraced gardens on the mesa above. Yet within a century, every dwelling stood empty, pottery still stacked in niches, turkey feather blankets left folded on stone benches. The only footprints left behind were those of the wind. What drove them out? The land itself holds clues. Tree rings from the period tell a story of relentless drought, 23 years with barely a drop of rain, withering crops and emptying reservoirs. But climate alone doesn't explain the careful way homes were sealed, as if their owners planned to return. Some archaeologists point to social fractures. As resources dwindled, the once cohesive Puebloan society may have splintered, with rituals and alliances failing under the strain. Then there's the eerie evidence of violence. A mass grave near the cliff dwellings holds remains with signs of blunt force trauma, hinting at desperation or conflict in the final days. Yet the most haunting theory isn't about collapse but migration. Oral histories from modern Pueblo tribes suggest their ancestors didn't vanish, they walked away, dispersing southward to settlements like Choco Canyon and Hopi mesas, trading cliffs for open skies. What makes Mesa Verde unforgettable isn't just its abandonment, but its ingenuity. These were engineers who calculated solar alignments to warm winter rooms, artists who painted geometric murals with minerals hauled from miles away, and farmers who coaxed corn from near vertical terraces. Their departure wasn't defeat, it was adaptation, a lesson in knowing when to let go. As shadows stretch across Spruce Tree House at dusk, tracing the outlines of vanished ladders and rooftop plazas, the silence speaks volumes. Sometimes survival doesn't mean staying. Sometimes it means leaving before the last drop of water is gone. Now, let's journey to a city that faced a different kind of vanishing, not in the arid southwest, but in the misty highlands of Central America. Where Mesa Verde's people left with purpose, the next ruins whisper of a disappearance so sudden, meals were left half-eaten on tables, as if time itself had paused. Beneath the ash-covered cliffs of modern Santorini lies a time capsule from the Bronze Age Akrotiri, a city so perfectly preserved, its three-story buildings still stand intact, their walls adorned with frescoes of leaping dolphins and saffron-gathering monkeys. This wasn't just a Minoan outpost, it was a thriving hub of art and commerce, where multi-story homes boasted indoor plumbing and furniture carved from imported cedar. Walk its cobbled streets today, and you'll find storage jars still filled with ancient olive pits, loom weights waiting for unfinished textiles, and a bed frame fossilized in volcanic rock, as if the residents simply stepped out for a moment. But around 1600 BC, that moment became eternity. Thera, the volcano at the island's heart, erupted with a force 50 times greater than Krakatoa, burying Akrotiri under 60 feet of pumice. Unlike Pompeii's tragic human casts, no skeletons have been found here. The Minoans, it seems, had warning. What makes Akrotiri extraordinary isn't just its destruction, but what survived. The frescoes reveal a culture obsessed with nature and movement: swallows mid-flight, antelopes grazing, and a fleet of ships celebrating a maritime festival. One masterpiece, the flotilla fresco, shows vessels with striped sails navigating between islands, their cabins packed with joyous passengers. This wasn't mere decoration. It was a window into a society that revered the sea, traded across the Mediterranean, and perhaps even inspired Plato's later tale of Atlantis. Archaeologists have found Egyptian scarabs, Cypriot copper, and Mesopotamian cylinder seals proof that Akrotiri was a crossroads of the ancient world. Yet the volcano's fury didn't just preserve Akrotiri, it may have unraveled an entire civilization. The eruption triggered tsunamis that ravaged Crete, 110 miles south, toppling Minoan palaces and choking farmland with ash. Some scholars believe this catastrophe weakened the Minoans enough for Mycenaean invaders to dominate them centuries later, but Akrotiri's true mystery lies in its silence. Why did no one return to salvage treasures from the ash? Why were the beds made, the dishes stacked, as if awaiting owners who never came? The answer might lie in the volcano's aftermath, a decades-long volcanic winter that rendered the island uninhabitable, scattering survivors across the Aegean. As we brush dust from a child's wooden stool or marvel at a fresco of boxing boys, their ochre skin still vibrant after 36 centuries, Akrotiri feels less like a ruin and more like a paused breath. This wasn't a city frozen in death, but in flight, a snapshot of life interrupted, not ended. The Minoans may have vanished, but their legacy whispers in every painted dolphin, every ship sailing eternally across plaster seas. And perhaps that's the lesson. Civilizations don't always fall with a crash. Sometimes they're simply buried, waiting for the future to dig them up. Now our journey brings us to the final vanished city, one whose disappearance remains history's most tantalizing riddle. Where Akrotiri's fate was sealed by fire and ash, the next metropolis slipped away so completely, even its name became a question mark. El Dorado gleams in the collective imagination like a mirage of gold, a city so rich. Its streets were paved with precious metal, its ruler dusted in gold each morning only to wash it away in sacred lakes by night. This wasn't just a place, it was an obsession, a siren song that lured conquistadors into the heart of the Amazon, their maps marked with rivers of silver and mountains of emerald. The irony, El Dorado likely began as a misunderstanding. Spanish explorers, hearing tales of the Muisca people's coronation rituals, where a new leader coated himself in gold dust and plunged into Lake Guatavita, spun the ceremony into a legend of an entire city dripping with wealth. But the truth, as always, is far more fascinating than the myth. Archaeologists have since dredged Lake Guatavita, uncovering golden figurines and emerald offerings that prove the Muisca's rituals were real. Yet no sprawling metropolis of gold emerged. So why does El Dorado endure? Because it's more than a lost city. It's a mirror reflecting humanity's endless hunger for the unattainable. Every era has its El Dorado, the fountain of youth, the lost mines of Solomon, even modern quests for asteroid mining. The conquistadors' fatal error wasn't searching for gold, it was failing to recognize the true treasure before them. The Muisca's gold wasn't hoarded, it was sacred, woven into their cosmology as offerings to balance the universe. Their golden king wasn't a tyrant bathing in wealth, but a spiritual figure enacting a ritual of renewal. The real mystery isn't whether El Dorado existed, but why we're still chasing it. Satellite imagery now scans the Amazon for geometric earthworks that hint at ancient cities, while historians piece together trade routes that may have inspired the legend. Perhaps El Dorado was always a collage fragments of real places like the gold-rich Zenu civilization or the terraced cities of the Andes, blurred by time and greed into a single shimmering dream. The tragedy isn't that we never found it, it's that in our frenzy to possess a legend, we overlooked the sophisticated cultures that birthed the story. As the sun sets over Lake Guatavita, gilding its waters with a fleeting golden glow, the lesson lingers. Cities of gold may only exist in dreams, but the human impulse to seek, to push beyond the horizon, is the real treasure. El Dorado's legacy isn't in lost vaults of metal, but in the stories that propel us forward, reminding us that sometimes the search itself is the prize. From the grid-like streets of Mohenjo-Daro to the golden mirage of El Dorado, these 22 vanished cities are more than just ruins. They're mirrors reflecting our own ambitions, triumphs, and vulnerabilities. Each one tells a story etched in stone and shadow, of engineers who bent rivers to their will, of artists who painted their dreams on palace walls, of civilizations that reached dizzying heights only to vanish into the whispers of history. What ties them together isn't just their disappearance, but the questions they leave hanging in the air. How does a city built to last millennia become a footnote? How do the choices of rulers, the whims of climate, or the cracks in society conspire to unravel what seemed unshakable? The stones of these places speak in riddles. Petra's rose-red cliffs ask us what happens when trade routes shift. Tikal's overgrown pyramids wonder if drought or division dooms a civilization faster. And Cahokia's silent mounds remind us that even the most ingenious urban planning can't outlast a society's faith in itself. These aren't just ancient problems, they're echoes we hear today in sinking coastlines, overstretched resources, and the fragile threads that bind communities together. The lesson of these lost cities isn't that collapse is inevitable. It's that survival demands adaptability, humility, and sometimes the courage to walk away before the walls crumble. But these ruins also surprise us with their stubborn hope. Machu Picchu's celestial stones still track the sun. Vijayanagara's musical pillars hum when touched. And Pompeii's frescoed bread stalls still smell in our imaginations of freshly baked loaves. Their legacies refuse to stay buried, reminding us that even in oblivion, something endures not just in artifacts, but in the ideas that leap across centuries. The Hittites' treaties influenced modern diplomacy. Teotihuacan's anonymous architects proved collective genius can outshine any king. And the Muisca's golden rituals, twisted into the myth of El Dorado, challenge us to question what we value and why. So as we step back from these 22 time capsules, the real mystery isn't just where their people went, but what they left behind in us. Maybe you're drawn to Angkor's battle with the jungle, or the eerie silence of Mesa Verde's cliff dwellings. Perhaps Leptis Magna's slow suffocation under desert sands resonates, or the audacity of a place like Great Zimbabwe, rising where outsiders said it couldn't. Whatever story lingers in your mind, that's the magic of history. It's not just about answers, but about the conversations we keep having across time. So tell me in the comments which city's echoes won't let you go. And if you want to keep unraveling history's greatest puzzles with me, hit subscribe and join the adventure. Until next time, remember, every ruin was once someone's home, every artifact a cherished possession, and every vanished city a reminder to build our own world with care. The past isn't finished speaking. Are you listening?